Well, hello there. Welcome to the inaugural broadcast of the first Pulsatile Podcast, a program that is going to be centered around the products of Pulsatile International and various people that I've come into contact throughout my life. Very interesting, wide variety of people, ultimately built around the concept of autonomic intelligence, all of which is spelled out in product form, in book form, in video form on the website that you can go to called pulsatileinternational.com. And I'm really excited to get this podcast going because it's a way to reach an audience that I've not been able to as of now. So thanks to digital technology, thanks to YouTube and technology such as that, we're able to do these things. And I'm anticipating great things out of this. Today, for the inaugural broadcast, I have my best friend and best student I've ever taught as my guest to discuss the very beginnings of Pulsatile International, which is laid out on the website. If you go to the website, there is a section called Pulsatile Community, where the history of Pulsatile International is laid out in about 3 or 4 different playlists, they're called, on YouTube. And it's a variety of videos that were taken, over a course of 6 to 8 years from beginning in 1990 all the way up to now. And it's very interesting to go back and look at those videos and show how we grew from, and you can see this is the original Pulsatile International was a kung fu studio called the Three Emperors. And we specialized in 3 forms of Chinese martial art. These figures on here, this is Long Fist, this is a style called Baji, and this is Taiji Chuan. But holding it all together was a Qigong system. If you're familiar with, you may not be familiar with that term. Most people who would even look at something like this are probably going to know what Qigong is. That literally means energy skill. It's a Chinese term. It's really relatively new. It was created after the communist takeover of China in the late 40s and early 50s. And prior to that, it had a variety of different names. But it basically just means the human ability to sense and cultivate and collect and control and manage chi or life force. And primarily, our focus is on your personal chi, but it can get into dealing with other people's chi and getting into the chi of your environment. And that word chi, Qi, transliterating the Chinese character into English, best translation we have for it is the force that animates. When you see something move, it's moving because of chi. There's nothing like it in the West unless you go way back to the pagan times. Plato and Aristotle have concepts and terms that come close to it. It was maintained somewhat in the Middle Ages and then jettisoned completely during the Renaissance. And as science came to take over the West, these notions were completely rejected because you can't measure them. But we're getting to the point now where we can. And the whole pursuit of the measurement or a Western approach to chi in the body was the motive for the evolution from the Three Emperors Kung Fu Studio to Pulsatile International, which is a um, an organization that's dedicated to developing a new science. And it's a new science of looking at things that we can measure at a very sophisticated level with Western science in the body, and then inferring from what we can measure what that invisible, unmeasurable energy is doing. And our ultimate goal is really to get to that. It could be a dangerous thing. In some ways, it could be like atomic energy, which is great, can do wonderful things, but it also has incredibly destructive capability. And the Chinese sure found this out when they unleashed Qigong on their whole society in the late 70s, and it incubated throughout a period of about a little less than 10 years, and it exploded in the late 1980s in the I, there might be some dispute over this, but I was there. I would argue that the Tiananmen Square protest was, in fact, largely, I won't say largely, but Qigong had a big impact on the development of those protests. And I was there to witness it over a 2 year arc from 87 to 89. And I can tell you for a fact, Beijing University was the center of that. And prior to that, 87, every one of those students that was out there jumping up and down in Tiananmen Square protesting the government was probably involved in Qigong or knew someone that was involved in the Qigong cult of sorts, and that would include me. I was also involved in one, and we'll get to the origin of that. Now, before I get to our guest, which I will in due course, I'm going to share a slideshow and go through the history of the school. And bear with me while I bring it up. I'll go to slideshow from the beginning. Right. So this is in many ways my story. I'm the one that brought all the stuff back from China, but I began as a regular karate head. And in the 1970s, I think I took my first class in 1972. I was super impressed with Bruce Lee. I saw Bruce Lee in the 60s actually as Kato in the Green Hornet and was fascinated by him. And then when his Hong Kong movie started coming out, I really got into him. So I did what I could, and the closest thing I could get to there really was no kung fu where I grew up, which was in the deep South. What you had were karate, mostly Japanese. You had judo, primarily taught by ex-GIs. You had karate studios, but the Koreans, who have spectacular kicking techniques, which Bruce Lee used a lot, was ultimately where I landed. So I got my first black belt in Tang Sudo, which is the same Korean martial art that Chuck Norris um, pioneered and made famous in the U.S. And then my I went and got my first college teaching job at Virginia Tech and became heavily involved. I was the faculty and supervisor, or whatever you call advisor for the Virginia Tech Karate Club, and I met the instructor there who had a private studio, and that's this gentleman right here, this guy, Ed Hampton. You can look him up on the internet. He has sort of gone into seclusion now, but in the 80s, he was quite formidable. And this man seated in front of him was his instructor, Jerry Jones. And we called him Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones was a Korean veteran, and over in Korea, he learned Mudokwan, which is another type, essentially, it's Taekwondo. But this is he learned the real deal. He learned hardcore Korean style martial art, and the story was he was a small man. He had a couple of interesting stories about him. One was that he was attacked by a much larger man who tried to bear hug him and do a WWE on him because he was much smaller. So Mr. Jones freed his arms from the bear hug and dug his thumbs into this larger man's eyes and gouged out his eyes. Now, that scared us all, and he was a pretty scary guy to look at. The other story about him was that he beat a bull into submission by kicking him over and over, as he said, in the brisket, which is the chest area of this bull, until he wore it out. So there's a man who pulled off what really there's only one famous martial artist in the lore of martial arts that repeatedly pulled this off was Matsuyama, who killed a bull with his bare hands. He'll come up again in conversation as we move forward. But this was basically Mr. Hampton taught stand up kickboxing, which was all there was. There wasn't grappling. It was considered unmanly and kind of boring to go to the ground back then. It was all flashy boxing with fancy kicks, Chuck Norris, Bruce Lee kind of stuff who had made it famous. So we all kind of followed that pathway. And in his studio, I kind of moved up pretty quickly. I came from Alabama, which is where I grew up, with a black belt, and he was very tough. I had to fight 8 people to get my black belt under him. No, wait a minute. Let me back that up. It was the brown belt. So to get a brown belt, he didn't accept my black belt. He made me go for brown belt. I had to fight 8 people, one after the other, and then the 8 people. Let's see, it was like it was five, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people in a row, and then it was 3-on-1. So he had 3 of his top students just savage me, and then I had to fight him 1-on-1. And my approach to martial art back then was just to be in the best shape you could possibly be in, and that was the best defense. And in that case, it proved to be a wise decision because Mr. Hampton was beating me about the face pretty badly. I had cuts around my eyes and everything from him just peppering me with jabs. But because I was in really good shape, I outlasted him. And one of my great, sources of kind of greedy pride was that I kicked his black belt knot off of him. So I undid his black belt with a front kick and unknotted it, and it fell off of him. And then he stopped the fight at that point. So I felt pretty victorious, even though I had the bloody hell beaten out of me by him and his gang of young black belts. But something happened around 1986. Um, this guy came to town. These two, this guy here with his mouth open is named George Dillman, who's a martial artist. He's a Okinawan Kempo instructor from Pennsylvania. Reading, Pennsylvania was where he heralded from, and he ran into this Okinawan master right here named Oyata. And Oyata was the real deal. The story was that he was a kamikaze one-man submarine recruit that they sent out to go blow up a U.S. destroyer, and he blew his boat up. It didn't blow the ship up, and he some miraculously survived and made it to a Pacific island and lived by empty hand. Karate means empty hand, and his particular style, which he called tuite, and it involved not only grappling, locking people's arms up and locking people's wrists up and inflicting great pain on the person that you lock up, but also kicks to the knee, just very, no fancy stuff. It's all take them out and do them in immediately. And a real feature of this, and this is what sprung all of us into another level, was that he had a system where he would hit certain acupuncture points on the body, primarily on the arms, the legs, and then he would simultaneously or shortly after hitting these spots on your external body, on the extremities, would go to the neck or to the chest, and that the combination of these strikes would induce paralysis, uh, blackouts, all kinds of things. And we were enthralled with this. The instructor, Mr. Hampton, became obsessed with it. And after he learned it, and I was still into being, jumping around because that was my forte, was that I was in really good shape. and I could outlast people, and I could do very high acrobatic kicks. And so I was sparring Mr. Hampton one night, and Mr. Hampton had been beaten badly one night by one of these very large kids that came from the college and had been sparring him. And apparently that sort of knocked him a little bit off his rocker when he got hit by this guy. Now, I didn't know this. I found out much later that he was very upset about having been beaten by this guy. So one night during a sparring match, I ended up having the misfortune of lining up against him. And he was really upset. I could tell on his face that there was something wrong with him. And I was dancing around him and, doing using my speed and my agility to kind of get the better of him because he's a much bigger guy. And it was all point fighting, so it was very controlled. So he couldn't really use size, and point fighting is hard to use size. Um, but then I ran in at one point to tag him, and all of a sudden I felt a shocking blow to my chest, and it was right over my heart. If you put your fingertips over your left pectoral, search around for the collarbone, and then go right below that collarbone and start digging around. And you press in right there, you'll feel a pressure point that is quite painful if you press in. He hit that area as hard as he could, and he knew what he was doing because he had learned it from Oyata. And he essentially gave me a heart attack. And I had numbing, first of all, it felt as though my heart came loose inside of my chest. It literally, I felt like had come loose. And months after that, I had sharp pain in the chest and I had numbing pain going down my left arm, all the symptoms of a heart attack. So shortly after Mr. Hampton did this to me, this guy showed up, and his name is Vince Black. And I can't zoom any closer than this, but if you will Google Vince Black martial arts, he'll come up. You just take a look at those eyes. This guy was a bigger deal than even Oyata in many ways, and it was because of his knowledge. He had a deep knowledge of Chinese medicine and also was a ferocious martial artist. He was a big guy too. He's about as big as Hampton, about 6'2". He's a little heavy, but that didn't matter because he knew so much that a guy like me was completely ineffective against him. And when he came along, he was invited to the studio because Hampton was upset about some of the problems that we were having. And by the way, this picture was taken after we were immersed for about a year with Oyata and Dillman, and there were problems that came out of that. Not just me getting hit in the chest, but the students were practicing on each other and using Oyata techniques, hitting each other in the arms and then in the neck, and then some of the kids were blacking out. I actually had a blackout driving down the road. This is prior to me being hit in the heart. Um, and so Mr. Hampton brought Jones in. He brought him back to kind of get back to his roots and to kind of stabilize himself, from the experience of being taken over essentially by Oyata and Dillman, and kind of pull back and combine what he learned from Dillman and Oyata with techniques Mr. Jones had taught him. And then Vince came along and changed everything up. And he made all the martial arts that we had studied appear to be child's play in comparison to what he was teaching. And his specialty at that time was a internal Chinese martial art called Xingyi, which means form, mind, boxing. Xing means form, Yi means mind, and it's based on five element Taoist theory. And the five elements are wood, fire, earth, metal, water. And so there's a technique for each of these elements. Very ancient, very sophisticated form of martial art. But he also knew acupuncture. And I was suffering at that time with these chest pains. I told him about it. And he got really upset with Hampton, for doing that. And he showed me these massage techniques. And then I had a group of students that were working with me at that time, younger people. And I had these students do these massage techniques on me. And it literally pulled the pain out of my chest into my shoulder and routed out my arm over a period of weeks. That made me a believer in the Chinese system because I was actually really afraid that I was actually going to have a heart attack, even though I was super fit and young and had no other telltale signs of heart disease or anything like that. So I was very grateful to Vince. So I became his student for about 2 years and apprenticed under him. And he would come and go. He lived in California and he also had a studio in Tucson, Arizona. And he came and visited with us periodically. And then he would teach me new material and give me different assignments. He had a guy who was over me in Blacksburg who also gave me books to read, and I learned quite a bit about theory, quite a bit of theory of Chinese medicine during that time. So this is 85 to 87. Oyata came onto the scene, I would say around 84, 83, 84, and I started this school in 81. Um, So that is the beginning of my martial arts career, my movement from a Korean, Japanese-based approach to um, Okinawan, which was actually acupuncture based, but it was for hurting, and then finally to Vince Black with traditional Chinese medicine. So that took me to Beijing. In 1987, I applied to Beijing University and was hired. And when I got over there, I immediately began looking for an instructor. And I found him in Wang Junhua. There's an entire backstory to this. It's even more complicated than my heart injury with Mr. Hampton. I had another chronic injury. I'll come back to it at a later date, probably to talk about that. But when I got to China, I was expecting to get acupuncture for this injury. It was to my wrist. And I was told that I had a wrist bone that was dead. It was broken. And I'll go over the story of how it got to be so badly broken. But it was martial arts essentially that did it. And Vince Black actually was involved with that. But I'd been told by orthopedists in the US that the bone in my right hand was dead and that I needed surgery. And if I didn't get surgery, um, my hand would become useless. And this is an arthritic kind of claw. And even with surgery, there was a 50-50 chance that it wouldn't work. That didn't sound too good to me. I tried some radical therapies that did not involve surgery, which were not working, did not work. So when I went to China, I immediately used my position at Beijing University to get to the top Chinese medical professionals in Beijing, which is the best of the best. And all of them told me that acupuncture was a low level form of Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, and that if I really wanted to get my wrist well, I was going to have to do Qigong. And I'd already learned Qigong from Vince, and I thought it was okay. I thought it was interesting, but it didn't do a damn thing for my hand. And I did it anyway. And I looked around for various masters. I must have gone to see, I'd say, somewhere between 8 to 10 different masters. And I settled on Wang Junhua here because he was the head coach of the Beijing University martial arts team. And I figured, if nothing else, I could learn some cool kung fu from him. And, there you see me practicing. That's actually uh, essentially a Tong Sudo flying side kick. But Tong Sudo and almost all the Korean high kicking arts come from China. They came from Long Fist, which was one of the things Wang Junhua taught me. But primarily Wang Junhua focused on Tai Chi and Qigong. And that was universally being pushed by the government and at all levels of society then that that's where the way people should go, that actual fighting martial arts was bad for your health. This young woman to Mr. Wong's right was a young woman. Her name is Gregory Philpott. Great friend of mine, great human being. She and I were boyfriend, girlfriend at that time, and she followed me over to China and started training. And because it was such a great experience for her, she was going to have to go back because she could only come over on a tourist visa. China was very restrictive back then about who could stay. So she didn't have credentials to teach English or anything like that, which was what she would needed. She would have needed that skill, that credential to be hired. So the other option was to marry. So she and I actually married in China and at an informal ceremony. And she trained me. She's a great person. She was very supportive of me and very supportive of me at that time, and even after we got back. So Wang Junhua for 2 years. Then when I got back, I immediately, because the kind of martial art that was being practiced in China at that time was very theatrical. I mean, if you see Jet Li now, that is the style of martial art that finally is, the U.S. caught up in the 90s. At some point, they brought him over. Jackie Chan had been doing versions of it, but still not quite popular. But very different approach to martial arts, very flashy, um, and very difficult, physically difficult. And because hardly anyone, and certainly no one, was doing it in Southwest Virginia, which is where I went to when I came back, I got publicity. So this is a newspaper article that was done on me, this picture to the left. And then I finally moved to Charlottesville, and this was immediately I got more as much press there as I did in Southwest Virginia, maybe more. And this is a press photo that was taken on an article that was done on me in Charlottesville, which is really where our guest starts to come into play. Now, just to let you know, now when I came to Charlottesville, I wasn't just a Kung Fu guy. I was pushing Qigong and talking about it quite a bit. And that opened me up to a very rich New Age community that exists in the Charlottesville area. And I'm going to go over the three. First is the Monroe Institute. I would say they're the most legit. They had military contracts. These are the people that specialize in remote viewing, in mind out of body experiences. The founder, um, I think it's Bill Monroe. Bill, I think is his first name. He, I think he was a radio engineer and he had some sort of mind out of body experience. And because of his engineering background, he started associating that with brain waves and, certain frequencies of brain waves that suggest that you are in an altered state or can get an altered state. So they develop technologies and programs for helping people to get to these brainwave frequencies. And the most famous person that came out of the Monroe Institute is this guy named Joe McGonigal. And I met him. I actually trained him in my Qigong system. He did not succeed, but now that I know more about him, I was very dismissive of all this New Age stuff when I first met him. I think it was certainly a mistake to dismiss Joe McGonigal because now that I know more about him, I know more about his story. I think he is the real deal, and he probably wasn't that interested. Um, he doesn't appear to be kind of hung up on health. Of course, no, everybody is that way until they start to lose it. But my pitch was that this will help you with your health, and he was actually having mind out of body experiences. So I would account that for his failure more than anything else. He just was preoccupied with his own thing. His cup was full. Let's put it that way. And another biggie, and probably the biggest New Age influence in this area, is Yogaville, run by the late, what's the guy's name? His name escapes me right now. It'll come to me in a minute. Um, at any rate, he was exposed as a womanizer in the early 90s, but they kept going. So it was just not, they weren't affected that much. His system was that famous and pervasive. He had Jeff Goldblum was a student of his, Laura Dern. There are other famous people that he was able to capture. and involve them in his mindfulness approach to meditation. Um, and then this character, Master Charles, he's called, he ran an outfit uh, out in the rural areas surrounding Charlottesville. It was called Synchronicity. And he was a really interesting character. There were a lot of rumors about him. One was that he was actually Ernie from My Three Sons, who had found Nirvana, whatever you want, whatever. His all of this is Indian based, by the way. There's also a very strong Tibetan Buddhist um, community in Charlottesville, and that's because the Dalai Lama's personal translator um, actually was in the University of Virginia, so they had an enormous um, Tibetan studies program that has grown even bigger. Now it's really large, and one of my former students took it over and grew it massively now, and it effectively runs all complementary medicine at the University of Virginia. But anyway, this guy, Master Charles, was interesting because I ran into him. This is when I first came to Charlottesville. I came because of this. And this is called the Psi Conference, PSI, Personal Self Improvement, which seems personal self seems kind of redundant. Um, but Psi, because it's the Greek character, I think that's why they did it. And here you'll see at the very end of it, right down here, where it says featuring remo keynote speakers, in-depth workshops, exhibits, Friday night social, natural foods, dining. Let's see what else. Meditation, environments, special entertainment, a variety of consultation choices, friendly environment, lots of hugs, my favorite. Opportunity to meet new like-minded friends, joy, new ideas, light, and love. Very, very new age. And that was my introduction. I mean, when I came to Charlottesville, I ran smack into these people. And primarily, let me go back to the blow up here. This guy, Master Charles, I met him at the Psi conference, and he sent um, disciples of his to hear my talk, um, which was well attended. It was one of the reasons why I ended up deciding to move to Charlottesville. Was there were so many people who were interested in what I wanted to do. Um, and then he started sending people to my school once I opened it and tried to recruit me from the school, promising me things like girlfriends, uh, a television, anything else I wanted. If I would just come live on his ashram with him and work with him. And I did not. Now, the sad story with him is that he did not bend from his mission, which was to spread this technique, which many people say he stole from the Monroe Institute. It's very similar to it. Frequencies and that using technologies to try to get people in meditative states. But at some point, I think it was 2000, I can't remember exactly when it was, but there was a massacre in Mumbai, India, and it was a massacre by Pakistani Islamist terrorists who came over and killed like 200 people right at the time that Master Charles was taking a tour group to Mumbai on a kind of pilgrimage so that he could go show them where his teacher, Muktananda, was his teacher, um, to show them all the choice places and where Muktananda grew up and so on. And about 10 of his people got killed because they invaded the hotel where they were, these terrorists did, and shot, I think, somewhere like 8 to 10 of them, may have been more than that. Anyway, it was a great tragedy, and Master Charles passed away 5 or 6 years ago. So we'll let him rest in peace and say no more of him. But very big kind of a wall that I hit when I got here were the influence and power of the New Age and the very entrenched New Age community. Um, Now, my first martial arts experience was with a local karate guy who recruited me to come in and embed myself within him. Now, he and I fell out of it almost immediately. We lasted about 6 months, maybe less than that, 3 months. And that was when my guest today first showed up. He trained at this place. It was called the Inner Stairway, and it was a Taekwondo school. Um, Even though the guy did have some also credibility in Japanese arts, and he immediately was threatened by the Qigong system that I was teaching. He had never seen anything like it. The martial arts were much more difficult than standard kickboxing and things like that, is what he taught. So we had a falling out, and he too ended tragically. It turned out he had a proclivity for observing people with their clothes off, and he got caught with dressing rooms that had two-way mirrors, and he would sneak into, he had a secret entrance to his studio, and he would come in the secret entrance, and he distributed keys to people so they could come in and train on their own, but he made them sign in so he knew who was coming when. And if it happened to be an attractive lady, he would know when she was coming, and he would sneak up the back stairs and get into the adjacent dressing room and use the two-way mirror, which opened up into the dressing room he was in, to observe the person taking their clothes off. He got caught, and here's the thing I want to emphasize how serious he was. He committed seppuku, which is the Japanese form of suicide. He disemboweled himself. And this was a huge shock to everyone. He was actually kind of a pillar of the community at that time. So anyway, I was with him in 1990, but by 1991 I found my own space, and we didn't last long. They were lasted about a year, and then the guy that owned the space right here where I'm doing the flying sword sidekick, um, his son was a hairdresser, so he kicked us out and gave it to his son and turned it into a hair salon. So we had to move down the street, and this became our home for about 10 years. And oh, sorry, let me go back. Let's see if I can go back here, folks. I don't think it's gonna let me. Let's see. I'm gonna have to go back and do it this way. Right, from current slide. Apologies. I want to blow this up. So this is the new place we moved to. This is a small group. We were much larger than this, but there's our star. I'm going to introduce him in just a second. And these are the younger people that were part of the school at that time, but there were some very sketchy people. These two women right next to each other right here. This woman in the blue shirt is an East Asian woman, caused a lot of trouble. In fact, her meddling kind of led to the evolution in some ways. It was sort of like the way a meteor event caused the extinction of the dinosaurs and ushered in, the era of the mammals. I mean, she was kind of the meteor that blew up three emperors. And this one right here in the, I don't know what you would call that, like pink, hot pink shirt, she caused a lot of trouble as well. And just one of the things that my guests and I are going to talk about is how the psychological aspect of Qigong ended up kind of becoming an exploding cigar for us. I mean, as long as we were doing stick and sword and jumping around and doing martial arts, we were fine just teaching movements. But when you get into mind body stuff, you're in deep water. And I also wanted to point out right here, these two students to my left here, this guy with the little beard, Alex Joseph, was clearly my best student throughout the 90s. He was an amazing little athlete. And then this young fellow right here, he was my first kid. He was 14 years old when he joined the school and was really a great kid. His name's Ray Gaston. And I owe a lot to them because at least Ray went in and recruited a bunch of other teenagers who came in, and they formed a cohort of people. The other people to my over here, this guy with his arms folded, he was trouble. I won't really go too much into him, but this young couple right here, they were pretty good supporters of the school for a while. And now we'll move on to the next slide. Let's see, I need to get out of this. So, what changed the scene was that around 1992, I got some very good press. And this article right here, a martial artist calls Tai Chi an exercise that heals. This was controversial because I used the spelling and I insisted on the spelling Tai Chi instead of Tai Chi because Tai Chi is a essentially a Jesuit alphabet that was created 100 years ago to transliterate Chinese pictograms into alphabetic letters. And Tai Chi is not how you say it. Tai Chi is the way you say it. And that's the mainland Chinese came up with their own system that captures the phonetics more honestly. And so I pushed that. I wanted people to respect mainland China because it did not have any respect at the time. So I became kind of a spokesperson for it. This article, though, came about thanks to the efforts of a physician named Donald R. Fowler, who was the head of a hospital over in Stanton, Virginia, which is just over the mountain in the Charlottesville area, and it's a more rural, kind of red America kind of place, but it's the home of Woodrow Wilson, Stanton, Virginia. It's a beautiful little town, and he was the main doctor. He ran the hospital, and I trained him in a 2-week program, and he was so blown away by it that he wanted to go deeper. And I taught him privately. I taught him Qigong. He got it. And so he summoned the newspaper over in Stanton and said, "Come here. I want you to write this article." And they wrote things. They put things in this particular article that no other publication has ever done. They didn't do it before, and they since have not done it. They refused to put things in here like this. But what they allowed me to say, if you look right here, it says Alton says that he and others who have studied Qigong have been able to control their metabolism, circulation, and here's the key, and even feel that they can chase infections and diseases out of their bodies. Okay, you can almost feel it, the infection, and chase it, he says. It will run from it. And every time you force it to another part of the body, it gets weaker. You can feel it. So this business of feeling inside the body becomes key once we start getting over into the more scientific approach, which we eventually developed. But then Dr. Fowler went even further when they went to him for a quotation. He says, it's not blood, it's not the nervous system, it's some other facet that's best described as the immune system. He says, noting that the concept is so linked to the Chinese practice of, noting that the concept is also linked to the Chinese practice of acupuncture. If we could release all of its power, it could even be the cure to cancer, to AIDS. Now, this is 1992, and you have the king doctor of this area saying possible cure to cancer and to AIDS. Okay, so prior to this article, I had maybe 10 people signed up for my Tai Chi class. This article was published, I think, on a Sunday. The Tuesday that the class was supposed to start, I showed up with a roster of 10 people, and there were 300 people that filled up the gymnasium where I taught. And thanks to Dr. Fowler, I essentially opened up a satellite in Stanton, Virginia, and it became a great resource of money and also students and just building on what I had in Charlottesville. And then another development was that I started teaching Tai Chi to elderly people. And this man right here, Carl White, former Johns Hopkins professor of medicine, and another fellow that I don't think he's pictured here. This is Carl White, and that's his wife. He was also involved with the Rockefeller Institution. And after I taught him and showed him that I could project chi out of my hand into his, and he felt his own chi. This guy's like 80 something right here. This is in 1992 or so. he got on the phone and called the Rockefeller Institute, said, Rockefeller Foundation said, you need to study this guy. And of course, I never heard from him. They probably thought he was losing it, but he was a really sharp fellow. And because of that, because of attention like this, I was able to bring in a large number of seniors, which also became a source of income and support for the program as it developed throughout the early 90s. So by 1995, this is about 50% of of the students that I had probably like 300 students all together. So this is maybe a quarter. Um, and you can see there are a lot of seniors, a lot of white-headed people in here. But look, here's a young girl. Uh, there's the star of our show right here. I'm getting ready to bring him on. We didn't have much color in our club. We have two African Americans at this point. Um, but that's just sort of the nature of the new age. It's a very white phenomenon. You don't have a lot of black people in the new age. But that's Charlottesville is, I like to say, is a pretty white town. And they're trying to change that. It's through UVA's DEI efforts, but I don't think it's not working. So at any rate, that's the school as of 1990. And this fellow right here, his name's John Dockin, and I'm not going to bring him in yet. I want to move on to the next slide because what John did for me was exactly what those other news articles did. So when John became my student, he was one of the first students that I taught, as I said. He learned quickly, and he had already been a really dominant tennis player, but he was sort of in a slump at that time. And he had just come back to town, and he didn't have a lot of stomach for it. Really, kind of how it looked, kind of sick of it. I think he had played a lot of, been all over the place and played a lot, and he was kind of burned out. And after I taught him, he went and played this guy who was supposed to be the new hot shot. Everybody loved him, and we call John Doc a Doc. By the way, Doc destroyed this guy. And here we go, like fourth or fifth paragraph into this article. And there, by the way, at this time, this was the only, aside from buying an ad, this was the only way you could get public attention. So the newspaper, everybody read. There was only one newspaper, and here it says, Dockin, a three-year star of Virginia during his college days, had vowed hastily, had moved hastily into the finals without feeling he was on top of his game, so he consulted John Alton, a martial arts expert, for a bit of advice. He could give him a boost. So anyway, he mentions me. I don't have at the conclusion of the article, he comes back to it, talks about how he used it to also build up his strength. And then here's another article that came out shortly out, another victory in which he credited me. And right away, I think it's the same guy. He beat him again. And second paragraph, he starts naming me and giving credit to me. He didn't have to do this. He could have just been quiet about it. But he was completely unembarrassed, as many people were. But a lot of people were too embarrassed to admit that they did woo-woo things like this. But Doc had the guts to give credit, and he benefited from it, and he was honest about it. And he said, "Yeah, I got benefit from it." And as a result, I ended up having a large number of his former tennis students or existing tennis students come to me and train with me, and people that they knew, and so on. So it's spread among a different demographic. So I had the endorsement of the King Doctor from Stanton. I had a senior feeder because I had publicity there and countenance from respected elders. And then John comes and gives me sort of the country club feeder, which really helped me move from being in the red into the black and to establish a real system. So John took me to visit his family in Montana. I want to let him talk a little bit about that. when we get him on here in just a sec. And this is us visiting in 91. Um, this is John's, if you're over here to your right, this is John's stepfather, Roger, and his mother. Um, and behind them is Glacier National Forest. I'm sorry, Glacier National Park. Grizzly bears running around up there, mountain lions. It's a wild place. And then these are family friends right here, Bud and Evelyn, who are a couple of characters. I'm sure that they could have worked them into the script in Yellowstone if they'd. I'm sure they're no longer with us right now. But they're amazing people. And then another character in the Dockin family. And by the way, Dockin is the adopted name. John Dockin is the name of his father, and Pike was his original name of John's biological father. And so this is John's biological father's uncle, Bob, who definitely could have been on Yellowstone. In fact, I think Rip, the character Rip in Yellowstone, was probably based on Bob, who's an ex-cop. And I think what Bob's probably like middle 50s right here. And this is John's cousin, Deb, who's a real Montana woman. Bob insisted that we go rafting. Um, and here we are on the raft. And he ran us straight into like a pit at one point. I lost those sunglasses. The dog was having a great time. Anyway, here's Deb. Okay, so Deb's out on the river with us, and there she is with an infant. What is that? Like 3-month-old baby, a 3-year-old, and here she is like pumping out on, out on the river. So it was a wild experience to go out to Montana. And at one point, Doc and I were really close to possibly locating there. And things took off in Charlottesville, and so I decided to stay because I'd already put in a year, and I didn't just want to let that go. Probably should have gone to Montana in hindsight, but hindsight is, 50-50. So this gets us to so a lot of things happened between 1995 and most recently the early 20s, one of which was the development of this organization, the International Society of Chinese Health Practices, located in Beijing Normal University. It started in the Beijing Martial Arts University or Sports University, and it's Beijing Normal is a social science institution where they study. They've actually moved Tai Chi. They won't talk about Qigong, so they only talk about Tai Chi now. I'll explain that in later podcasts about why they won't do that. But because of my work and my due diligence over here and my faithfulness to trying to show the world the Chinese really are legit, that they're not just these creepy communists that want to take over. They have real things to offer the world. And there's Doc on the end with this organization, and he was invited in 2023 to give a presentation on how he adapted his tennis knowledge and tennis teaching instruction approach based on what he learned from Tai Chi principles. And he used Djokovic Novak Djokovic as his illustration here of various postures that are related to Tai Chi that can also be applied to tennis, and he uses it with his tennis students to great effect. And the real payoff, though, for this was in 2023, was that after we gave our presentations, we had a giant dinner. This dinner was so incredibly good. The food is amazing, put on by this young man right here. Not so young, but he looks young. Lu Xiaojun is my good friend who now is a full professor at Beijing Normal University. Used to be the head of martial arts college in the sports university in Beijing. And I actually brought him over here in the late 1990s to work at my studio. So he and I have remained good friends. We are both determined to demonstrate to the world the value of for him it's Tai Chi, and for me it's Qigong. But the best thing about this is that the five greatest living masters of martial art were the guests of honor at this dinner. And here they are. I'm going to point them out. One, two, three, four, five. These three, and then these two guys. This woman here is this guy's wife, and this guy right there is Jet Li's master, Wu Bin. And Wu Bin married a woman, she's like 40 something. He's like 85. So, and he's a great guy. All these guys were super nice to Doc and me, and were very, humble about themselves. They didn't act like, the typical martial arts masters, the Cobra Kai kind of uh, caricature you see in the U.S. These are very high level men. And Wu Bin was, super gracious to me and showed me on his phone, showed me all these pictures of Jet Li when he was a little kid and how, because that's what they do. They go out into the countryside and they look for kids with talent. And he showed me Jet Li in his village running around as a spazzy little 10-year-old, which was an amazing experience. Um, and So that brings us up to where we are now in Pulsatile. So the Kung Fu Studio um, was how we got started, and I'm going to go into next couple of probably third or fourth podcast. I'll get to the place where we launched from Kung Fu Studio to research and moving more into the science and really getting into what is it that this practice does and how I ended up rebranding the practice of Qigong. And this is I'm gonna stop sharing here. We might come back to this after I introduce Doc, let him say a few things. Um, but I want to talk about, where we're going in the future. So I'll come back to this slide after Doc comes on. Now, Doc, will you please show yourself? There he is, the man of the hour. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, do you have any comment to make about the things that I covered?
Um, wow, what a journey. I
Yeah,
mean, it's been a
40
blessing.
years.
Thank you.
40, yeah, 40
Yeah,
years.
amazing journey through so many different phases, and we're still here.
Yeah,
Right.
yep, we're still here. And that's yet another story to come is the
Yes.
challenges that right after um 95,
Hmm.
96 at the end of 96 is when my life took a radically downward turn.
Hmm.
And it took God's grace and all of my will to pull out of that. Nose, it was a nosedive too.
Yes, yeah.
So a lot to talk about that. But let's go
Hmm.
back to the early days, Doc. So tell people where you were when we met. Like what had happened to you? What did you just come, like you just come back to Charlottesville to take an assistant tennis coaching job, which
Yes.
is way below your pay grade. I mean, Dokken, where were you? You were at Firestone Country Club in Detroit. Is that where?
Country Club of Detroit in Grosse Pointe, Michigan.
Grosse
But I
Pointe, Michigan.
Yeah, but it was a 3 month a year stint. And so then I would travel to Boulder, Colorado and live there. And then I would go to Santa Barbara and hang out there. So I was still in my exploratory vagabond kind of way. Right after I graduated, I went and played on team tennis in Germany. And then I would play money tournaments in France and sleep in train stations and then call dad and say, "Hey, come pick me up at LaGuardia." So it was always I was out just discovering the world. Had a girlfriend in Gainesville, Florida, and went down there and stayed for a while as well. So really, when I came back to Virginia, that was to kind of that was a full-time, year-long position and being rooted. But all my ventures in life brought me back to Charlottesville, and that's where I met you.
All right, so you got to say though, like you were kind of on the ropes a little bit, and one of the reasons, and you confided this in me at the time because you went to Boulder, Colorado, and studied with Ken Cohen,
Yes,
right?
yes,
So
and
what was it you were, I mean, I'm sure in hindsight you have a different view of what it was you were dealing with, but at the time, what would you say you were feeling? Like malaise, anxiety, exhaustion? What was it? What, I mean,
I
why?
was just searching for some sort of meaning and some sort of direction. I mean, tennis, I'm always going to be involved in that. I'm biased towards it. It really helped me when I moved from Montana to New York. Um, but yeah, my body was breaking down a little bit. I didn't have any way really to recover. And, I was just putting out a lot of energy and, um, so I was searching for something. That's why I went to massage therapy school. Ken had some sort of system, and to tell you the truth, I really don't even know. I can't remember what it was. Um,
Didn't you say he took like a magic sword and like cut the evil chi off of you or something like that?
he did a lot of things. He had Native American rituals. He had, you know, martial arts rituals, and he did stuff like that. Yeah,
So
it was.
he was the king of New Age. I mean, he's really one of the pillars
Yes,
of the popular New Age.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
He wrote a lot of articles, if not a few books.
yeah.
Yeah,
So, but didn't work, right?
no, didn't stick
So,
with me.
I would say we started at the guy that committed seppuku at his studio,
Hmm.
you got the hallmark response within 2 weeks. That's my memory. At the 2 week point, you were like, "Whoa, I felt it."
Yes. It was
And
basically like something was alive in your gut, and your gut started
like
to
the
throb.
alien.
Yes. And I mean, and then because the way you taught it, you can move it consciously. And that was profound and astounding.
Yeah,
Never felt anything like that in my life.
yeah, and I didn't know you before, but
Hmm.
I got the impression that you changed. Like you changed in a lot of ways. Like your personality changed. You went from being kind of introverted, maybe self-doubting a little bit to like more forward facing. I won't say aggressive, but confident. And I remember you showed me a video where you went out to Montana before you and I went, and you came back and you said, "Look at this video." And it was you at I think was it Deb's wedding? It was Ron's
Yeah.
wedding.
Yeah.
Ron's wedding. And
Hmm.
you were going wild. You were doing like martial arts stuff, in at the wedding. And I think people were shocked, because they were used to you being kind of, Roger
Reserved. Yes. Yeah.
stoic, kind
Yeah.
of Norwegian,
Hmm.
Scandinavian, yeah, by God, but not doing splits in the middle of the room. So I think my impression was that it unleashed something in an aspect of your personality that came out in tennis, which showed up with the bolus competition, where he was
Hmm.
like this little, he was kind of like I was with Hampton. I was this little guy that was fast, was like dancing around him and using my speed, and he was like that. I remember he made a bunch of noises when he played. Um,
Hmm.
Sounded like he was being raped or something. I remember it was oh, like
Yeah.
hitting the ball every time. And you just manhandle that guy. Like you flattened him. And I think uh, yeah, it could have been your understated. Maybe you knew you were going to do that to him beforehand. I don't know whether you felt like you were going to do it, but I remember going to watch that one match, the one of the newspaper article where you were going like that, and you were like, um, I think you were in your warm-ups. You weren't even in shorts. But it is a picture with a very solemn look on your, very serious look on your face. And I remember being like, whoa, this is Dockin, taking care of business. And because I hadn't seen that yet.
Well,
But
I mean, I think that what I learned from you with the practice is that it allowed me to, because I did have a lot of energy, but I was expending it all through my 20s and early 30s. And with the practice, you bring it back in and you store it, and then you can actually harness it and focus it to your choosing. And that was a revelation to me. And basically, when I grew up in Montana and I was skiing from a very young age, all I did was I was seeing and feeling, and you have all this nature and energy around you. That's what it basically felt like, but you could focus it.
so it was like
And
would you say that it made you regain that sensibility of when you were a kid in Montana? That,
yes, it gave me my youthful energy, my youthful chi back. And then enhanced abilities to do things that I'd never done before, which was um, totally enthralling to me.
yeah. Well, just to mention, and this kind of getting ahead. So after the Three Emperors period, I ended up being invited to China at a very high level. And I was invited by their National Qigong Association to come and listen to a lecture on and to be exposed to what they were willing to give out at that time, which was radical. And they said, this is the best Qigong system that we think is out there right now. And the name of it, the Zhineng Qigong, Zhineng means the way it was translated was intelligent Qigong,
Mm,
which is as opposed to stupid Qigong, I guess. I don't know,
mm,
but I think a better word for it is innate intelligence. It's what you're born with. And that really was the basis of their theory that you are recontacting that innocent, pure chi that all babies are born with, but you're able to bring it into your physical adult body.
yes.
And I was like, wow, that is really what, you know, that matches my experience. So
Well,
even
and that segues right into Francis Crispin. Okay, so the primordial chi that you're born with, and just a little backstory: Francis Crispin was a nurse, and she was putting her hands on dying babies.
she in the ICU, she was an
And,
ICU nurse.
and so she came into the studio, and you had helped me, you know, put hands on or energy into people's body that had muscle pulls and
Well, wait,
this, that,
wait,
and the other.
wait. We got to say, back then, I taught it. The way that I taught it was that you got the qigong from me. So I went up and I put my chi
Okay.
into people, and
Yeah.
then they would get it. Now, I did that for a while, and what I started noticing was that some people made me really sick when I did that. So, and I'd been warned about this, but that was how I was taught. And the system is that you don't really get Qigong unless you get it from the master. So that way you're always beholden to the master. And I was very suspicious of that. And eventually I pulled away from it. Now I'm kind of somewhere in between. But part of the system that Wang Junhua taught me involved having student helpers work with the teacher to work on the chi of a person who was in distress or who was not developed yet. So you could
Mm.
literally, I could treat people with a sickness. I had a method for pulling, literally like pulling the poison out of them.
Yes.
And I taught that to you. I taught, that to all students who achieved a certain level.
Hmm.
So one of the ways you learn is you help.
Yes.
And I go, okay, you stand there and you put your chi into them at this certain point. So go ahead now. Now you
Yeah.
can take it
So we
away.
we did that successfully with a few people, but Frances had came in with like eczema on her arms, and she just was.
Oh, it was
Remember?
worse than that.
Oh,
She
was it?
had she had severe endometriosis, which
Okay.
means endometriosis is when the uterine lining of a woman's vagina
Yeah.
essentially cancer. It like grows like crazy and it causes them a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And people are mystified. They don't really know what causes it.
Hmm.
But anything having to do with your genitalia, we're going to come back to this because this ties in. Sexual energy is core to traditional Chinese medicine, and most people don't understand that. You really see it when you do Qigong. This is really where it comes in. So the fact that she was festered or corrupt at the genitalia level suggested she had really damaged herself. So go ahead. You were
Yeah.
working on
So,
her and
so you asked me to work on her, and so we did our thing. You were pushing chi into her, and I was on the other side, kind of like catching.
receiving it.
Yeah, receiving through the kidneys. And then we did our automatic movements to get rid of it. And I don't know what it feels like to die, but I mean, I felt like I was dying for 5 days. And I did everything. I practiced twice a day. I was doing, all the 150, 150, 150. And I finally kind of came out of it. And I remember going in and I said, I'll never do that again.
You have to persist. That's the thing. Like if you don't have the ability, this zherneng, this innate ability, which is the
Hmm.
sensation. We haven't really discussed that yet, but it's this ability to feel what feels like a heartbeat in your just below your navel, and it
Yep.
shoots up
Yep.
center line of your body, goes up into your sinus cavity, and then it starts to follow your breath. It'll descend on the exhale and then ascend on the inhale. And then eventually you channel it to other parts of your body. But if you don't
Yeah.
have that primary pump, you cannot get rid of this stuff. So all these people who do energy work, which gets us back to the New Age people,
Yeah.
that were doing all this stuff, they had no ability to get rid of that. And I'd already when I first came to town, I was invited. Mostly there were women who wanted to be healers. So they invited me to their white wine, Benzedrine and white wine get-togethers where they would sit around and talk, share. This was the sharing. And I got up there and I just said, before I start talking, I just have a few questions for you. How many of you feel dizzy a lot of times? It's like every hand in the room went up like that.
Mm.
And I said, do you feel it worse after you practice your energy work on people? Oh, yep. I said, how many of you have like skin eruptions that just flare up out of nowhere? And all of a sudden, across the room, a woman goes, "You mean like this?" And yanks down pulls her blouse open, and she's got this florid eczema on her chest. And I went, "Yeah, that's what I'm." And I said, "That is coming from your clients." And the fact is, the Chinese would tell you that you guys don't know what you're doing,
Mm.
and they would tell you not to do it. And women in particularly are vulnerable because women are vessels. Women are sticky. They are
Yeah.
containers. So if they're going up to people and engaging that other person's energy, more than likely they're going to absorb it as they would if they were given birth or if they were in intercourse. They are receivers. So they would, not that women can't do it, but there's a special level of preparation you can't get around this sort of natural theology that is
Hmm.
the basis for all of this stuff. And that's where the West has just lost it. we have thrown out all these ancient ideas, and I don't even think we could find the text where this stuff may have been mentioned.
Mm.
Maybe in late, like really, really early medieval, Galen, who was considered the first medieval Western physician. You might have references to it, but only probably five or six people in the world even read that kind of stuff. But in China, they're still
Mm.
reading it. They've been reading it for 2000, at least 2000 years.
Mm.
And I'm going to do a little, there's a rich background to go into, but just to kind of bring it, we're going to have to close out here in a little bit because we've been
Sure.
going a while.
Yeah.
But if you remember when I first started teaching, I said in order to understand what you're doing, you need to know that the human body consists of four fluids. Okay. So the first fluid is, let's see if I can get this right, Jing. Jing is sexual fluid. That is how you produce children, and it is related to all of your energy. And it is it's linked to your purest chi, your zhi your innate chi. Yuan Qi is another way to put it. Yuan Qi means pure Qi. Then comes blood, and then comes Jin Ye, and then comes energy Qi. And those four fluids are kind of like interlocking circles. So the first circle is Jing. You get Jing, it's got to be moving, it's got to be mobile, it's got to be circulating. And if that happens, then the blood circulates. If the blood circulates, then the jinya, which is everything else, skin, mucosal lining, the slime that comes out of your nose and your earwax and the sweat and all that's jinya. And then qi is the energy that's on the outside. So what qigong does is it first gets you in touch with this external chi, but the purpose is to drive down and to get to Jing. And the only way you know that you've gotten to Jing that I know of is the feeling of that pulse. And the term that Wang Junhua used was yohaiza. You feel that yohaiza means you have a child. And it's
Mm.
like a baby kicking its
Right.
mother when it's
That's
pregnant.
right. Yeah.
And it doesn't stay like that. But when it first starts, it's like a kick, boom, boom, boom. And then eventually it just becomes this flow. And then you can take it into other areas and very important areas that are super beneficial for you. Staying young, being able to fight infections spontaneously. But it's the mismanagement of Jing that I would argue that is the great crime of the Western world. And you and I both, Doc, you and I both grew up with it. You know, we were taught that, uh, and in fact, I'll just stick with me. We can talk about you, how you illustrated as well. But I was a literature professor before I got into this. And my favorite writer at that time was a guy named Norman Mailer. And I'm actually going to do a podcast on Norman Mailer. And Norman Mailer said that the goal for a human, and he's talking largely men because he was a sexist kind of writer, as he said, was the pursuit of the ultimate orgasm. And if you think about it, we were encouraged just to go jerk off, have as much sex as you want to, and that was the meaning of life.
Mm-hmm.
And what what our ancient Puritan religious traditions have taught us is no, that needs to be restrained, that needs to be managed, and they gave us institutions like marriage and the allocation of your energy toward your life's work, taking care of your kids. But with Qigong, you really feel like what happens to you when you lose your Jing. So just for all those people out there who don't know, and I would count most people in this category, if you practice this and you're, maybe not work, the older you are, the sketchier these kind of things. But you take a young 20 something, late 20s, what were you, 27 when I first taught you? 26, something like that. So
Yeah.
I was
Let me see.
32 when I learned it.
Mhm.
And I remember Wong Jinhua telling me, showed that picture of my wife, the young woman my girlfriend. I was going to bring her over. And Wong Jinhua had already told me, he said, "Oh, you like Bruce Lee, don't you?" And I went, "Yeah." And he goes, "You know why he died, don't you?" And I said, "He got hit in the head or something, like one of the myths they have over here. A master killed him." And he goes, "No, he had too many girlfriends." The Chinese term is Nupeng no Tai Dola, girlfriend too many. So I just went, yeah, yeah, sure, sure. I didn't believe any of that. I was told by several masters that I would fail because I was an American and Americans cannot control their sexuality. And I
Mhm.
was like, yeah, you're right. We're studly. We're manly men. I just had these ideas like that. I associated virility with the expenditure of sexual energy. So when Wong found out that I was going to bring this young woman over, he goes, "Yeah, this is Alton now." He goes, "This is going to be Alton after his girlfriend comes over here first few days." He goes, "And then about a month later, you're going to be like that." So I didn't believe it. And it wasn't exactly a month, but I will say this. At this time, I could kill respiratory infections at will. And I was amazed by that. Back when I was in the United States prior to China, if I got a respiratory infection, I was sick for 10 days at least. And then I felt like shit, for a few days while I was recovering. And then by 2 weeks, I was back normal, but I hated it. And I would get sick a lot because I had a very stressful job as a college professor. I was surrounded by sick students, 30 something students in a classroom. They're like 30 petri dishes filled
Mhm.
with microorganisms spreading it among themselves, and then they hand me their papers that are blurred with like mucus blurs. You handle those papers, you get sick. So, and then the stress of like, grading the papers and then trying to make tenure and all that sort of stuff. Graduate student, same way. But with this, I can just boom, kill it. So after about 6 months, maybe I'd say 5 months, my girlfriend was with me. Boom, I got hit by a respiratory infection. I couldn't get rid of it.
Mhm.
And I went to Wong, my teacher, and I said, "Hey, this isn't working. Why isn't it working?" And he goes, he looked at me and smiled. He goes, "You tell me." And I still didn't believe it. I was like, "That's nonsense. How do you explain that? How can you possibly explain that?" But as a living experiment, I'm here to tell this audience that it is true that what you do with your sexual energy is going to redound to your health. And if you can be a celibate person, if you don't have a way to work with that sexual energy in some way other than sex, then you're in trouble. So if you go look to the East, you look at yoga, they have entire traditions built around the Kama Sutra and what to do with sexual energy. I mean, it's, head spinning how many things, books and whatnot have been written on that. And a lot of that's been bastardized in the West and turned into essentially a pornographic um, machine. You're like, yeah, Kama Sutra, do all these different sex poses, and have sex all the time. I mean, that's essentially what a lot of the yoga people end up doing with that knowledge because they don't understand it.
Mhm.
But in China, in the East, they completely understand it. And what's interesting is how they don't really talk about it that much. And it's almost like they want us. It's like, go ahead, Western man. Keep living your life the way that you think is so great and you think you're a big hot shot, studly guy. Well, go ahead. I'll be 80 years old and still running around kicking if you'll be dropping dead at 50.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that that actually is the case, but I am saying that I noticed, and I'm a living experiment that the ability to hang on to your jing. And by the way, this gets us into a whole discussion of like, well, can you still have sex? And the answer is yes. That's what all of those tantric yogic systems are about. The Chinese have their own tantra as well. And it is possible to pass sexual energy back and forth. In fact, as far as the sharing goes between chi, the best sharing is a female and a male. When the female and the male share their chi, you have a complete Taiji Tu, yin yang. Okay, so what we had was a sick female between two very masculine men, and we were both destroyed. I was sick too. I was sick for 5 days. It felt like the flu,
Hmm.
achy all over,
Mm.
dizzy, weak, confused. And I don't think she actually got any better. Um,
Mm.
she never really, there were several people that never really got the pulse that I could tell. Because, you knew, like, when you got it, there was no question. You want to, yeah, I felt that. But when
Yeah.
people went, I think I feel something, I'm like, you didn't feel it. You're not there. Now, that doesn't mean, I mean, some people get it slowly, but that is really the meat of it. And you can do martial arts with this. I
Yeah.
personally believe the actual martial art movements help um, the flow of chi. And the reason I say that, and it's better than karate and these other martial arts like kickboxing. Your hands are just stuck here like this the whole time. I mean, jab and so on. But in long fist, your hands are like doing these big sweeping movements, moving around like that. Da, 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 da. There's just a lot of range of motion. And the internal arts, the same way. The hands are these full, complete whole body movements, joint by joint by joint movement, all the way down to the pinky ring finger. And when you can feel your chi, you really can appreciate those movements. And so the way that most people learn this in the West is back assward. They learn movement. They learn it in a state of mind that's physical, bodybuilder, football player type of physicality. So you don't really feel these subtleties. It's more quick twitch, get it done, long as it superficially looks right. You're not feeling anything internally.
Hmm.
But the Chinese way, the way that I was taught, was that you feel internally, and then then the martial arts become meaningful. And that
Hmm.
was truly, I think, the unique thing about the Three Emperors, which is the start of it all.
Yep.
All right, brother, we got to wrap this bitch up. You have
All right.
any other further comments to make?
N-
Anything occur to you while I
No,
was saying that?
no. I agree with all of it. It's lots of lots of thoughts coming back through my mind hearing you speak.
Well, we'll have you back on for a repeat performance at some point because we didn't cover enough. Now, we
All right.
went a good bit longer. We went an hour and a half, which is fine.
Okay.
Um, there's a lot to say. And
Hmm.
I want to thank everyone that watches this. Please pass it to your friends. There's going to be more to come. We have a lot to say. This is going to be a unique source for this kind of information. And we're not just going to stick in the Chinese woo-woo part of it. We're going to get over into my efforts into articulate these things into scientific, understandably terms. So stay with us, and we thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on